You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning into Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, Charger Bowl Family, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning in the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, how are you, sir? How was your Father's Day? It is a Tuesday, June 20th. Again, the doldrums of the off season for the NFL. I know every single one of us out there is just itching to have it back. But special episode today, sir. And I apologize. I kind of just buried the lead as I was asking, how was your Father's Day? And I just kept kind of running with it. So let me retract back to my original question. How was your Father's Day, sir?
Thank you. Father's Day was tremendous. Hope everyone out there who are fathers or aspiring fathers have a tremendous Father's Day as well. Weekend was fantastic. How was your weekend, by the way? Did anything fun?
It was good. It was eventful. Dad and I went golfing.
How'd you do?
I made par on one hole.
Got the next modern day Ricky Fowler over here.
Solid. So without getting into the specifics, I was in the 3-digit mark and kept it under 200. And for me, that's a win.
That's a win. Yeah. We have a very special guest today. Chargers writer Eric Smith has his pulse on this team through and through. Players, coaching staff. Really excited to kind of talk to him about a lot of things here. We're going to talk about, obviously, storylines of the team. We'll talk about, training camp expectations, some of the coaching staff, lots of fun things, as well as just looking forward to training camp and what to expect once pads are on 11-11. Super excited to have Eric. Great guy, father himself. Eric Smith coming up soon. But Jake, before we get into it. All right, Jake, over under. Let's go Jake theme. You just recently saw The Flash. Over under, your personal opinion, 3.5 stars. Over or under?
This movie had so much potential, and I know
he's going under.
I know that there are those out there, DC hardcore DC fans that absolutely love this movie, and if you can get past, a couple of the. Well, not a couple. If you can just get past the bad CGI and like the story for what it is and it being a love letter to DC by the time that you reach the end of the movie, I get that. What'd you say the over-under was? 3.5? DC just has just very few wins in this particular timeline.
You can tell this is painful for you
before
right now.
We end up getting everything rebooted here in the next couple of years. There are very few that have just hit the mark, and it's for its merits and what it had. I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan, so of course that drew me to it. And honestly, when Keaton's on screen, is some of the best moments of the movie. So I'll give it a 3. I'll give it a 3.
Okay.
Majority of people, I got it. They love this movie. They give it a 9 out of 10. They say it's top tier DC. It's just, hey, look, I'm not knocking your opinions. If you like the movie that much, more power to you. I just didn't. It's not horrible. It's not one of the worst things that DC's ever done. It's one of
pessimistic Jake, right on cue.
It's average. Sorry.
Okay. Before we pay the bills and get to our much more than average, Eric Smith.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your betting needs this season. Always the fastest and easiest way for all of your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your very own home. All you have to do to get into the action is go over to the website. That's betonline.ag. Use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to receive your rewards. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Jake, Eric Smith actually is celebrating his 1-year anniversary with the Los Angeles Chargers. So what better way to have him celebrate than to join the folks at Chargers Unleashed? Jake and myself will have Eric Smith from the Chargers next on Chargers Unleashed. Well, very excited today. Very special guest with us. Eric Smith, writer for the Los Angeles Chargers, has his finger and pulse on the team across the organization, top to bottom. Super excited to talk to you today, Eric. Get to know a little bit more about this Los Angeles Chargers team. Eric, thanks for joining us. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Kind of a quiet week around here. Players and coaches are gone. Just trying to rest up a little bit before camp, but doing well.
It's just you and the janitor there, right? Just everything else is crickets.
Feels like it. Yeah, no, pretty skeleton crew. But I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks, so it'll be nice to recharge.
There you go.
Okay. Well, before we get into the fun stuff, let's get into more fun stuff. Where are you going on vacation? What are you doing?
Going to Hawaii, actually. My wife and I,
Good
we're
girl.
gonna take our let's see, by then she'll be like 14-month-old daughter to Hawaii. So we're bold, gonna go with that. At least her parents are gonna come too, so that's good to kind of
That helps.
take a little bit of the load off of us. But yeah, going to Maui for 5 days. Looking forward to that.
Oh, man, that'll be fun. Best of luck on the plane ride. I know that's kind of the biggest thing that parents are anxious about. My wife and I actually took our kid to Hawaii months back on our first plane ride, and it went well. So you'll be great. Bring snacks, bring videos, you'll be fine. Okay, so tons of stuff we wanted to talk about today. We'll talk about storylines of this team. We'll talk about the rookies, the coaching staff. You do a tons of profiles on this coaching staff that I want fans who have not had a chance to listen or see that get to know it from your perspective. Let's kind of start off with the OTAs and camp takeaways. Like, you've been there, you have kind of an inside look at this team. You've been there for all of it. From your perspective, like macro, as those have kind of gone into the shadows, if you will, next step training camp, what are the biggest takeaways for you of this team specifically this year?
Yeah, so it was my first off season with the team, right? Like, I joined before camp last year. And when I joined last year, there was a lot of hype around the Chargers. There's not as much hype this year, but the team is still the same team. And I think that's important to note because, maybe there's not as much buzz or fanfare, externally, from the national outlets, but it's still the same team, essentially. Maybe a few faces are different, obviously a different coordinator. But something Brandon Staley said last week, really kind of resonated with me, was that, it's still the same team and same faces. We just have another year together. And, I think we can all agree, right? The team didn't reach their full potential last year, whether it was injuries and, all this stuff. I think they can still get there this year. And some of that has to do with it's still the same team, and there's still Justin Herbert and all these playmakers, and Derwin James. So while externally the buzz may not be as high, I'm still high on the team. And I think they can go far this year. It's just kind of putting it all together, staying healthy, peaking at the right time. So I just feel good. The general takeaway is I feel good about the team. And if people don't want to talk about the Chargers externally, maybe that's fine. And let's just kind of fly under the radar and then, see where we are late November, early December.
Are there any either players, coaches, moments that stand out to you specifically from OTA so far?
Yeah, the big one, right, is once Justin Herbert was able to get into team drills, because it took him a few weeks as he was kind of recovering, he was letting it fly, and I think if you can probably pick up on that from me or, or Popper or anyone who was covering the team on a daily basis. Once Herbert got out there and, once he joined up with Kellen Moore, on the field, it was incredible to see because he was just letting it rip to everybody. It wasn't just Keenan and Mike, or Quentin, I can't remember the guy's last name off the top of my head, but Pokey Wilson, I think his name is. Pokey Wilson catching 50-yard touchdowns, and it's what? This is not something we saw from the Chargers offense last year. And it just gives you a lot of hope going into camp. Because I think we can all agree that explosive element was missing a year ago. That's why they kind of made the change at coordinator. And we'll see how camp is because it's way different with linemen, and full 11-on-11 drills. Most offenses probably look good in 7-on-7 drills, but Herbert looked great once he was out there, and he was just trucking it around. It just gives you a lot of hope for the offense this year.
Eric, I'm glad you brought up the aspects of Kellen Moore, because the coaching profiles that you have been writing for the website have just been absolutely phenomenal. Plethora of information in there. And I'm curious, just because, you read through these, and especially when you start asking each one of these position coaches, whether it's Tom Donatel, Giff Smith, even the article that you put up yesterday with John Timu for the team. I'm interested to know, just as far as, is there anything, maybe even just some of your favorite responses that you've gotten from some of these guys when it comes to player position outlook, anything that's standing out to them and the way that they respond to you? What's some of the ones that have kind of jumped out to you as far as when you've been going through some of these coach interviews?
Yeah, it's been a great series. I can't take all the credit for it. It was kind of a joint initiative with the PR staff and myself to kind of get it going. They kind of wanted to get the coaches a little bit more pub, which is because you rarely hear from assistant coaches around the league in general, right? It's just the head coach and the coordinators and the players, but the assistant coaches are on staff too, and they're busting their butt all year round. So they wanted to get them more pub, and I wanted to talk to them to get a chance to know them better. I've been here a year. I see these guys around all the time. I chat with them, not non-football stuff, but like, hey, let's dive deep into football stuff and kind of see what I can learn. So the whole series has been great. In terms of your answer, I know you mentioned 3 defensive coaches when you kind of preface the question. But what the offensive coaches have said about Kellen has really kind of caught my ear. Because I'm like, it's just a general question I've been asking. Hey, what's the first couple months been like with Kellen? And even some of the ones that haven't come out yet, like Kevin Koger, the tight ends coach, or other ones like that, they've all said like he's just really easy to work with. Like he doesn't have an ego, and pretty much every coach has had the same kind of similar line. But also that like he's been very adaptable in the sense of like he's not just bringing the Cowboys offense to the Chargers. Like he's going to keep what we've done well here the last few years, because there are, even with the coordinator change, there have been plenty of like really good pieces, player wise or play calls or whatever, that have worked, right? Like Justin Herbert is no slouch. Like he's had success the last few years. So let's keep what has worked well, bring in some new stuff that Kellen likes, but also match what the players do well. And I think he was really Kellen was telling with that in a press conference he did, and he was asked about the tight end, just like in general. And I think the question was like, are you heavy on tight end? Because obviously it was a big part of the offense in Dallas. And here, and maybe it's not as many big name tight ends. He's like, well, no, like that's just what we had. Like we'll work with what we have, and we will fit the offense to what our players do well. And so we still don't really know what that looks like. Like we'll find out more in camp and as the season goes along. Like I said, 7-on-7, it's just kind of a passing league type thing. But the answers on Kellen have been great. More so, like in general, it's been great to get to know the coaches of how they got into the NFL. That's something that always kind of fascinates me. Chris Gold, the assistant special teams coach, like no one ever hears from him, right? Because he just doesn't do media, which is fine. But he's like one of the best coaches on staff, like a great guy. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, like, how'd you kind of get to the NFL? And he said he was kicking in the Arena Football League. He was a pretty good kicker. His brother is Robbie Gold. And
who's a pretty good kicker.
Who also is a pretty good kicker. And he said, he was working out. He was living in Chicago, and like he was just kicking at this Elmhurst College, some small college. It was one of the only places he could show up and kick. And a coach there was like, hey, like, do you mind helping out our specialist? He said, sure, it's fine. Well, then Chris gets hurt. So then he becomes a full-time coach there, like helping out the guys. That coach goes to Syracuse, brings Chris to Syracuse, and then Chris gets his feet wet and then gets hired by the Broncos. So it's like, just randomly, he's working out on a college field in Chicago, and now he's coaching in the NFL. Like just fun stuff like that. The whole series has been great. I've gotten tons of good feedback on it. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
one of the coaches that I think a lot of folks, everybody talk about Derek Ansley, who I think is going to have a huge kind of refreshing impact on this defense. Tom Donatel, in my opinion, is kind of going under the radar. I think it was pretty widely known that the team was very high on him. They brought him in for a reason, and the piece you did on him, and you were kind of talking about, I believe you're asking him about kind of how he teaches the players and kind of how he adapts to folks. And the thing that I kind of took away from that I don't necessarily know if fans have had a chance to kind of see yet is like the innovation style that he has with players and teaching. And, you talked about how like he uses rugby, uses basketball. He's a visual teacher. He keeps players engaged in like multiple different ways. And it was just really interesting to kind of see how, at the end of the day, like these are humans, but to see him being able to kind of take all of these different approaches to keep the players engaged and to get them learning. Because he had talked about, like, at the end of the day, like, it's not up to us to know things. It's up to the players to know things. And if we can't teach them, then what are we doing? I'm paraphrasing. But talk to us about kind of Donatel, just kind of what you've seen from him and the impact he's had on the team so far.
Yeah, he was really good. And I kind of had not a weird relationship with him, but an odd crossover, because like I used to be with the Vikings. So the Vikings hired his dad like 3 months before I left. And his dad was great, like in the time I got to talk to him. And then I come here and Tommy is here. And he's one of the guys, like I'd say hey to him in the hallway, and like we just kind of chat briefly, but had never really sat down with him for a long time. And just like, you could tell like he's a coach that is like on the rise. And he's really smart. And like the teaching aspect that you mentioned, that's something I heard from a lot of coaches. But really from him, and that, he could have 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever DBs in the room, and they're all going to learn different. So it's like, how do I present it where all 15 guys are going to learn it? And maybe they don't all get it on the first day. And maybe the second day I have to go back and change it up a little bit so that this cluster of players picks it up. And then maybe I have to do it again and coach it like a third or fourth way, so that when we get to the practice field at the end of the week, everyone is clicking with it and we're rolling. So he was just really good on that. He was really good on like culture and like what he learned in Seattle, from Pete Carroll and all that, which I thought was interesting. I've noticed, a lot of these coaches, right, are former players. He actually went to Iowa, was recruited to Iowa as a quarterback, and then ended up playing defense. Like he went to linebacker and then I can't remember the order, linebacker, safety. So just like how they kind of see the game when they played all over, I think has been really fascinating as part of this series too. Donatel's been good. I'm almost like halfway through it. I think there's 9 have published. I think there's like 11 more to go. So there's still like a lot left.
Wow. Okay.
Looking forward to run it all the way up until camp starts. And I've done all but one interview. I have one guy left. I'm going to get him when he comes back from break. But just like to preview, like some other guys who are going to be good, like Tom Arth, who is the like passing game specialist, fascinating guy, like former head coach. Played in NFL Europe, just like really good stuff. He was like with Peyton Manning for a few years in Indy. Like the 2 line coaches, Brendan Nugent and Jay Rogers, really great. Even like Chandler Whitmer, like the offensive quality control guy, like just a great story. And like the work he does maybe like goes unnoticed because like he's a quality control coach. But like he has a big impact on the team and the offense. So yeah, just like a really good series. Like, and I'm not doing much, right? Like I'm just asking questions.
You're too humble. But
yeah, it's good.
Good. Well, let's kind of shift gears a little bit, but we'll stay on the theme of the coaching aspect in a way. Let's talk about kind of the rookie impact that we should expect. And I was watching, all the series, all the ones come through, and the one that was interesting to me was wide receiver coach Chris Beatty. And he talked about, Kellen Moore and kind of talked about how excited he was and talked about how underrated Josh Palmer was. But You asked the question about evaluating Quentin Johnston coming out of the draft and the expectations of him as a rookie. And his answer to that I thought was really interesting to kind of hear him use some of the basketball analogy around Quentin Johnston. He talks about he doesn't have a lot of wasted motion, talked about him being really good right after the catch. But I love the idea of him saying that, he can be both a power forward and a small forward at the same time, where he can kind of have that small forward aspect where he can, be a little bit nuanced, if you will, but then can also have the power forward approach and dunk on guys and go over their heads. And at times he could do both. And then the part at the end where he said, the nice thing about him coming into this wide receiving core is like they don't necessarily expect him or he has to carry this wide receiving core and be wide receiver one now, but like they do want him to come in and compete to be the wide receiver one day one. Yeah. And so talk to us about just the rookie impact, but Quentin Johnston in particular and how kind of Chris Beatty kind of shined him up a little bit.
Yeah, that was good. When I talked to Chris, it was like a 2-part interview because I talked to him a lot about Q when I did that long form about how like the Chargers scouted and drafted Quentin, and then kind of just parlayed that into the other questions about Keenan and Mike and all that. Yeah, with Q, like he looks the part, and that's when you talk about like all the basketball analogies and size and all that. Like he looks like an NFL receiver already. And he hasn't even had like a full off season to really kind of get into the weight room. He's lifted weights and all that, but like you just kind of see it usually like a transformation with guys from year 1 to year 2 in the NFL, just because they've had a full off season. But he is a big dude. And yeah, the quote you referenced, I think Beatty also said something about like he like plays above the rim. I think he said something about that. And like, that is just great because it's so rare in this league, right? For receivers to be wide open. Like no one is ever like wide open. Like the DBs are too good. It's usually like a contested catch or like a close, the window to throw it into is very tight. So if Q can kind of like use his frame and go above the rim and like go get the ball like Mike does up high, that should only like add a boost to the offense, right? In terms of the other rookies, like I'm excited to see Thule, like that third edge rusher. I think like he's shown promise. And Giff was really high on him when we talked about him. I know Ryan Ficken is like fired up to get Henley, Dayon Henley on special teams. I think Ficken said he's going to be like a core 4 guy. Like he's already going to play on every special teams unit that he can.
Henley?
Henley, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Dayon, yeah. And then the rest of the guys, like once you get like 4th, 5th round, like you're just kind of hoping they're going to contribute on special teams and kind of fill in some depth. Obviously, it's different with Darius Davis. As of now, he is the returner, like the kickoff and punt returner. Like that's where he lined up this spring. We'll see how the new kickoff rules kind of affect that, right? Because like we just got to see how that goes. But yeah, punt returner, like he's going to be the guy, I think for sure. But yeah, I think it's a good rookie class. Like the thing is, kind of like what we talked about with Q, no one is expected to come in and like be the guy right away, except I guess if you want to count Darius Davis as a returner, but they can all kind of grow into their role and learn. They all pretty much have veterans in front of them who have been around for a long time. And so they can kind of ease in. Like none of them are going to be expected to be like day one starters per se. And that's good because as they learn and grow, then maybe at the end of the season, right, when you need depth and you're trying to make a playoff push and it's a long year, then the rookies will have, are in a good spot to step up and help contribute.
Eric, I wanted to talk about just overall storylines heading into this year. And I know that you had your joint conversation with Jeff Miller, Daniel Popper, Elliot Tieford, and you guys were kind of always all, taking into your own accounts as far as what expectations were, who stood out in camp. And then for this particular storyline, I know that you had written, and really there is a plethora of storylines as it relates to just if you were to break things down by position, but you singled out and not surprisingly, as far as given the aspects of Kellen Moore and what everybody's expecting him to bring to this offense. But you singled out the Chargers offense in general, and Justin Herbert now back fully healthy. And it's not pads yet. It's not 11 on 11 drills. But from what you observed, tell me a little bit about just why that was your choice, for obvious reasons, but why that was your choice. And then where do you kind of see that storyline developing from there once we get training camp underway?
Yeah, I think with Herbert, right, like all eyes are always going to go to Herbert. Especially like I said, he was hurt. He wasn't hurt. He was rehabbing. He was on the mend early on in the spring. And so when he was out there, like we were all just kind of waiting for him to come back. And then once he got out there, it's like, okay, how is he going to look? Is he going to be limited at all? And then he just, like I said, throwing bombs to Pokey Wilson. So he just looked great. And that's why there's so much excitement. But also just because we didn't have that last year, right? And like I'll say it from like my perspective. Coming over from the Vikings, and like watching, I had seen Herbert play, and kind of following the Chargers here and there. I come in and I'm like, hey, this team is going to light it up. Like, we're going to be scoring 40 points a game and all this stuff. And it just didn't happen, injuries and everything else, including to Herbert. And so I think like we're kind of back there again, where like there's just so much potential right now. And Kellen Moore is a big part of that because we're seeing the shot downfield and we're seeing the aggressiveness and all that. And I think like that's what fans want to see too, right? Like I love defense, but like fans gravitate to teams and offenses and players that score 40 points a game. And I think what I wrote in that group chat is that's how you have to win games too. Like offenses are just so good. Rarely are you holding opposing offenses to under 24 points a game anymore. It just doesn't happen that often. So like, especially in the division we're in the conference, like you look at the quarterbacks up and down the conference, you're going to have to score 30, 35, 40 points a game to get to where you want to go. I don't think anyone's going to get to the AFC title game and win 17-10, So like if we have this explosive offense, like that's the main ingredient to the recipe of making a deep run. So that just, I'm kind of thinking long-term with that. Like the offseason has been great, but like that's what you need down the stretch. You need to score points in order to win games.
I wanted to piggyback off that for a second because, as you mentioned, you had come in from Minnesota and you had obviously watched this Chargers offense that would have been 2021 in that circumstance, the year before you were here. And obviously that was the first year with Justin Herbert, with Joe Lombardi in that standpoint. And then I want to go back to what you had said at the beginning of the show, where it already just feels different from where we were the year prior. Can you tell us, just kind of like, without getting into the X's and O's type of things, but just as far as, is there a message that at this point in the season that already looks different with Kellen Moore leading this offense that we didn't happen to see at this point last year?
Yeah. I'll touch on the run game first and say that we can't really tell with a run game because it's just been 7-on-7, right? Like, so I can't give you really an answer on that. We'll know more in camp and then in season, like kind of how the run game looks. And we know obviously it needs to be better than it was a year ago. I just think like, you just look at the collection of players that we have and it's like, well, this should be what we're doing. We should be throwing the ball down the field. Like Herbert has incredible arm talent. And, we have, like you said, like a basketball team at receiver, with Mike and Keenan and Quentin and Josh. And like Donald Parham had a good spring. And we saw what Gerald Everett could do when the ball was thrown his way. It's like we've kind of built an offense to throw the ball, and why not do that? So I just think like, I can't really, like, I wasn't getting too into the Chargers before I got here, but like I think it was just the expectation of like, let's just push the ball down the field, and that's what we saw this spring. And again, we're gonna have to see how it goes in camp and the season because like. It's just shorts and t-shirts right now. That's just 7-on-7. So like most people look good, but the optimism is high. I can definitely say that.
I guess a question I had, and I am by no means comparing Quentin Johnston to Justin Jefferson, so I'm going to preface this with this question. But you were there the rookie year for Justin Jefferson, and you kind of saw that play out and the animal that he is now. And you're seeing Quentin Johnston now, and you mentioned that he kind of looks like the NFL receiver, already kind of acting the part. Are there any similarities that you see in those two, either in how they came up in college or how they acted in their first kind of camp? Like any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because JJ was drafted, I think, what was it, 2020? Yeah, and that was during COVID. So, like, I was covering the team, right? But I wasn't, like, around the team on a daily basis. So, you know, there was no off-season program that year. So, like, I didn't know what he looked like in minicamp. And he certainly, like, made plays in training camp, but he didn't even start the first, I think, 2 or 3 games of the season. So it wasn't like the Vikings knew we had an all-pro on their hands right away, or else he would have started week 1. You know, Quentin is definitely bigger. He's just like a bigger frame, and so maybe he can win maybe more of those jump balls. But like, you know, JJ has shown he's probably one of the best receivers in the league, and he can kind of do anything. So, you know, I don't really want to compare Q to JJ just because JJ just like took the league by storm like right away and hasn't stopped, you know, and he can just kind of do everything well. Like Quentin hasn't played a game yet. So the jury's kind of out on him to see what he can do, but I'm a big fan of him for sure. And I think he'll contribute this year, and I think he's got a good like long-term outlook.
Now, I guess let's kind of get to, you know, we all know the team success and I guess lack thereof last year in terms of how the season ended with that Jacksonville loss in the playoffs. It feels like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like there's a lot of pressure on this season in many aspects. And whether that's from a coaching aspect with jobs on the line, whether that's like Tom Telesco and his tenure, whether that's with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack contracts and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams contracts, and you got the Justin Herbert massive deal coming soon. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that are kind of leading to this crescendo of, regardless of what happens, positive or negative, feels like 2023 is like a very pivotal year for this franchise. Like, does it feel that way inside the building as it does outside? Like, what are the optics and what are the feelings like there about that?
Yeah, I think pivotal is a good word, but mostly because this is like year 3 of Brandon Staley, and you know, you look at where they were; they went 9-8 and 10-7. So like they are taking the steps forward. I just think like like I said earlier, given the buzz that the team had last year, and then it didn't come to fruition. They want it to happen again, but they need it to happen again. You know, like if you just kind of stumble again and like there's injuries and stuff, then it's just like another frustrating year. That's just hard to cope with, you know. I don't know about like outside pressure on people's jobs and all that. Like that's not my lane to get into. But I will say kind of like what I mentioned earlier too. Like to me, this team is still like ascending. You know, like they still have all these core pieces, and there's still a talented roster, you know, top to bottom. The one thing I'll add to that is like one thing we know in the NFL, you can never keep everyone together forever. You know, there becomes a shelf life where people come and go, and with the Herbert contract, that's going to make it difficult to keep everyone forever. Just because with the financial aspect, you know, if he gets X amount of dollars. Okay, well, then you're paying other players money now where you're going to have to move it around. Okay, you need a younger player to step up or whatever. So, like, you know, this core is fantastic. And like, the big names on this roster are big names, and then they need to play well this year, and there's a lot being put on their shoulders. But you can't expect the same group to be together for 5 years, you know. So, like, they're kind of in this window here where it's like, okay, this you know, could be one of the last years where everyone on this team is together, and let's go make something special happen.
It seemed like a 2-year run that they had. Like, it was like last year and this year are the 2 years where they can try to make all this thing go forward with the contracts that they are. It'll be interesting to see. Like, I think you're right, though. Like, prepare for this team to look different next year. Like, it has to. There's no way around it.
Yeah, you know, and mostly because of the money, right? Like, the answer usually is always the money.
Last one for you, Eric, before we get you out of here. Just announced earlier today, training camp returns for the Chargers July 26th. So everybody mark your calendars for that when we get back to players back on the field. Outside of what you were saying earlier, as far as your expectations, your biggest storylines with this offense going into training camp, position battles, any players in particular? I know you highlighted Rashawn Slater and having him back in your conversation piece as well, but rattle them off. What are some of the biggest things, storylines, player battles that you're looking for as we get into training camp next month?
Yeah. Good question. I wrote on Chargers.com today, linebacker is intriguing to me. I mean, it's not really a position battle because it's going to be Kendricks and Murray starting at the linebacker spot. But just like how that group kind of comes together and how maybe EK can elevate Kenny, because like what I wrote, like there might not be a player on the team with more like physical traits or tools than Kenneth Murray. He like looks the part. He's fast. He flies around the field. It's just kind of getting him to find that consistency on a play-by-play basis. And maybe Eric Kendricks can be the guy who helps him do that. Not to keep talking about the Vikings here, but like I know Kendricks very well from like my time in Minnesota, and like he is a fantastic player, and I think he's really going to help the defense. And if he can help Kenny be at his best and combine, they can help in the run game. I think that's just going to make the Chargers defense really good, because we saw what they did last year against the pass. It was I think a top 10, like number 7 overall in passing yards allowed. So linebacker is one of them. Kicker obviously is something that we're all excited to watch. It's a good battle between Hopkins and Dicker. Pretty even so far through OTAs and minicamp. They were both like almost like dead even, and then on the last day they both kind of struggled a little bit. But it mid-June, it doesn't matter that much. Like once we get into
June.
it's June. Once we get into camp and like joint practices and preseason games, that's really where like the evaluation really like ramps up. I'm glad go ahead.
I was going to ask you about the kickers. Like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we've talked about it where, and this might be my stupid belief, but it seems like it would be very hard for this team to move away from Cameron Dicker, given how things went last year. And it sucks for Dustin Hopkins because of like how incredible he was and the heroics he had last year and just how good he is. But given age and all things considered, like it just seems really hard for me to fathom them not sticking with Dicker unless something catastrophic happens where he just absolutely, tanks. Like, does it feel that way for you? Am I completely off base there?
I can see that point. I can see both sides of it, right? I can see, okay, let's go with Dicker, who is younger, like a little bit cheaper. We saw what he did last year, right? But at the same time, like we just said, this is a veteran team that wants to win. Maybe they go with a veteran kicker, right? And they kind of go that route. And like you said, Hopkins, like the only reason he didn't
he's great.
He just tore his hamstring and like made you 4 field goals on prime time. Like it wasn't his fault. I think they're in a win-win situation, and I think I wrote about this a week or two ago. Whoever wins the job is going to win the job because it's going to be a good battle. And then maybe they just end up trading the other person late in camp or something like that, because some team is going to need a kicker. Some team always does. Someone gets hurt or a team maybe realizes that we don't have a good as a kicker as we thought we did. And we have two very solid options here. So maybe we get a draft pick out of that. But yeah, kicker is going to be great. The battle is going to be fantastic. We'll be tracking that for sure all summer long.
And I guess the last one, camp battle, everyone talks about receiver and interior defensive line. Interior defensive line seems like that one's going to be a bloodbath. It feels like that position group specifically is very deep. Talk to us about what you think is going to end up if you had predictions. I know this is way too early. I know it's only June, but wide receiver, interior defensive line, who do you think makes it on those two?
Yeah, with receiver, it's like, okay, how many are we keeping? Are we keeping 5 or 6? Right? You can.
If they keep 5, oh my goodness.
Yeah, if they keep 5, someone's going to get lost out because, you have your top 4 now with Keenan, Mike, Josh Palmer, and Q. And then that doesn't include Darius Davis, who's going to be on the team to return. That's 5. Jalen Guyton, we didn't see him because he's still rehabbing, but we know the threat he provides. Bring him up again. We mentioned him more than anyone on the show. Pokey Wilson has had a great camp. He had a great spring. And like Darius Shepard made some plays. John Hightower, Keelan Doss, like all these guys look good in spring. So like it's going to be tough. That final, let's say they keep 6. Okay. It's like Guyton and like 4 or 5 other guys for one spot, essentially, So it's gonna be a tough battle. D line, it's a little weird because we don't know the health status of a couple of those guys yet. So like with Tito and Austin Johnson, like if they're healthy, I think it's a pretty solid group. But if they're not fully healthy in time for camp or week 1, then you're like, okay, how is this group going to look? We're going to see. Obviously, like Sebastian will be up there, and Morgan Fox are going to be in there. But then, who else are you going with up there now? Like Nick Williams, like he's a veteran guy. Like Scott Matlock, like they were like I know the coaching staff is high on like Christopher Hinton. So it's like, is that who we're going to be going with early on because of injuries? I don't know. There's just so much that it's funny because like. Minicamp ends and we have all these questions about training camp, but then we have to wait 6 weeks, right, before we even like can get any sort of answers, which is good because like we all need a little bit of downtime for sure. But yeah, like I did ask Jay Rogers about Tito and Austin, and that'll come out in a couple weeks. And he's like, I'm not putting any expectations on it. Like they're rehabbing, they're working hard. I'm not going to tell you they're going to be back by this day or this day, but if and when we do get them back, it'd be great. So it's just a little bit up in the air. And I think if they do come back healthy, then that group turned into a pretty solid group. I know they had their struggles last year. A lot of that had to do with injuries, but yeah, I think it's a solid group overall.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this training camp unfolds. I think the 53-man roster and cutting that down is going to be so hard. And we told fans last episode, like, be prepared. You're going to see names that you're not necessarily wanting to see go purely because of the talent on this team. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for this roster construction. Eric Smith, senior writer for the Los Angeles Chargers. Man, you've been so good. I appreciate all your insight. If you have not already checked out Eric's work, go to www.chargers.com/news/a conversation with. You can just Google those and you'll find it. Has a ton of profile pieces with all the assistant coaches, has some players as well, and like you mentioned, has a ton still to come. Eric, thank you for doing this. Anything else you want to tell the great friends of Chargers Unleashed? Anything else you're doing between now and then we can give folks a heads up on?
No, doing good. Thanks for having me on. Like I said, just gonna try to enjoy Hawaii and relax a little bit. But yeah, the grind is coming for sure.
There it is.
It'll be here.
Well, for Eric Smith, Jake Hefner, Dan Wolkenstein, this is Chargers Unleashed. Aloha from here. Safe travels, Eric. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep.